Waldy and Bendy.
Hello and welcome to the podcast they could not stop, Waldy and Bendy's Adventures in Art. Now, I'm Varwain Ushtrak, art critic of the Sunday Times, and I'm joined as usual by the art historian Bendor Grosvenor. Or am I? As you know, it's Halloween week this week, when devils abound and shapes are shifted. So you have to be careful whom you trust, very careful. Bendy, how can we be sure that you really are Bendy?
Good question, because I'm feeling not quite myself today. So, Wald, who knows who's actually talking to you down the line? You're looking as healthy and happy as ever. Although I can see in your background you've got a picture of a very deathly looking, is that St. Francis of Assisi or St. John the Baptist? Who's that?
Yeah, that is St. Francis. He's looking up to heaven because Jesus is about to send his stigmata down. You know, the famous scene of St. Francis getting the holes in his hands and his feet to prove that he's a kind of second Jesus, as it were. Right. So, yeah, big moment. And what's great is that it's just implied. All you see is his face looking up. Yeah, I'm in France, and I've got a couple of sort of 19th century pictures knocking about. Nothing like your palatial possessions in your castle in the Hebrides, but we try our best, we poor people. You know how it is, Bendy.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to a Halloween special.
Yes, indeed.
And we're going to talk about spooky and ghastly things. It's good that I'm feeling not quite right because, we're all of us. Death is everywhere. Memento mori is a great theme in art history, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, we are all getting older, and when I look at you, Bendy, I feel I see kind of. I don't know. You have got something of the rattling skeleton about you, haven't you? Do you know? Somebody wrote to me the other day on Twitter say that you and I would make a great Sherlock Holmes and Watson, and you would. You would make an absolutely excellent Sherlock Holmes, I must say.
I'm glad you're going there because I don't feel like I could be your deputy. Well, I'd have to be in charge.
That is true as well. You are a monomaniac. Listen, you've had a busy week, I know. I happened to barge into, by accident, the little Twitter war you're engaged in with the novelist Philip Hensher about Vermeer. What was all that about?
Oh, I've got Andrew Graham Dixon, our fellow TV art history fellow. Look, there's the book. Andrew Graham Dixon's new Vermeer, which I'm enjoying very much. And Philip had written a wonderful, entertaining review in The Spectator of Andrew's book, which I thought was a little bit harsh. And his viewpoint seemed to be that, well, we can't read too much into Vermeer's paintings because Vermeer was just painting, ordinary things and not thinking very deeply about the world. And I thought that was a little bit harsh. So I you know what I'm like on social media world. I jump in, feet first, and gloves off, and off we went.
No, that's right. If you see a gap, you jump into it. I mean, you're a dragon of social media, I must say. But I mean, it's that old argument, isn't it, about whether art is just art, and that's all it is, or whether artists have some deliberate intentions. And there's been a shift in Vermeer thinking, hasn't there, towards just seeing him as more of a Catholic artist, and as an artist whose pictures, rather than just being these vague scenes of people looking dreamy, that they had more specific meanings. That seems to be the sort of nub of the argument between you, wasn't it?
I'm interested actually because I see a long tradition of writers being very sniffy about painters. Shakespeare is the most famous example. Shakespeare thinks art is up to no good. What does he say? A portrait of someone shows only what the eye sees, but not what the heart can know. Yeah. And of course, writers do think artists are. They must do, because they're defending their trade, aren't they? They must think artists are a bit second-rate, and the pen comes first.
It's funny, this whole ranking of the arts business. I think I've mentioned before, there's a fabulous letter by Gauguin to one of his friends, the artist Schufenecker, I think it was. And he ranks all the arts in a kind of top 10, like we do in our awards bit of the podcast. And he sort of has, from number 9, which is ballet, number 8 is drama, number 7 is poetry, etc. Literature's number 3, music's number 2, and art is number 1. So art is the greatest of the art forms. And you know why? It's very interesting. You know why?
Yeah.
Because art can be understood and comprehended and seen immediately. In other words, as soon as you look at a picture, that picture is finished. Whereas with every other art form, like a book, you have to read it from beginning to end. A bit of music, you have to listen to it all the way through. Film, you have to see all the way through. But a painting is a painting. Now, of course, you can spend hours and hours and hours in front of a Cézanne trying to understand it more deeply, but you don't need to. It doesn't need you doing that to finish. It's been finished already. So he thought that was a great thing, that art just is what it is immediately, and that made it the most superior of the art forms. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm all in for that. And as someone who's tried to write about art, I mean, you're a professional writer about art and you do it beautifully, but I find it quite difficult actually because I like to just stick to facts and let the paintings speak for themselves. But perhaps we should come back to this subject, Wild, actually. It's quite interesting about
Cheers.
the long...
Let's get Andrew Graham Dixon on sometime and talk about Vermeer and the book and these sorts of issues. What do you think?
I'd love to do that, yeah.
Okay, we'll do that. But as you said, this is a Halloween special, so it's full of dark stuff. Later on, you and I, Bendy, will be going mano a mano to decide what is the most frightening painting in art. So there's lots to choose from, which one will win. We'll also be talking about that terrifying year of 1666, with all the sixes in it, when so much that was so awful happened. So that's coming up. First, though, a more modern shock. Something that only happened last week. It's shocking news from the art world. So, Bendy, you know all about this. This is this extraordinary fact that Charles III of England met Pope Leo XIV in the Vatican, in the Sistine Chapel, and they said prayers together. You've written this book, The Invention of British Art, in which Henry VIII and all those events of the Reformation play very big. You know what happened between the Catholic Church and the Church of England. So how on earth did it come about that Charles III ended up praying with the Pope in the Vatican? Extraordinary, wasn't it?
I thought it was an amazing moment, yes. As you say, the head of the Church of England, our monarch, and the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, have been at daggers drawn for centuries since the Reformation. And this was an amazing meeting where Charles III, I think of his volition, because he's a spiritual fellow, decided to travel to Rome, to the Vatican, and have a prayer meeting with Pope Leo XIV. And it's the first one since the Reformation. The two heads of the churches have been praying together. And they went to the Sistine Chapel, and it looked absolutely glorious. And while I'm a sucker for a bit of ceremony, and I tuned in and watched it. Did you catch any of it?
I didn't watch it, but I did read about it afterwards, and I just looked at all the photos, which I thought were really, really spooky, to be honest with you.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, they're sitting under the Last Judgement, for God's sake. Michelangelo's Last Judgement, the final moments of us in existence. And there are these two characters who appear not just in history, but in prophetic history. There's people who shouldn't be coming together. And what worries me, you know all about the Sistine Chapel. You know what it shows. You know what's in there. Basically, it's all about the end of the world, right? If you look up in the Sistine Chapel, you see all those prophets looking terrified, absolutely terrified. Why? Because the end of the world is happening around them. So there are various prophecies in which characters come together who could be interpreted really as Charles III and the Pope arriving in the Sistine Chapel together. So listen, you know me, I'm a very realistic man. I'm not someone who finds swans hiding in pictures by Thomas Lawrence or any silly stuff like that. But there could be a good reason to feel a little bit of dread about the meeting of Charles III and Leo XIV. And if the end of the world happens soon, just don't say that I didn't warn you.
Well, I thought it was a fascinating moment, art historically as well as historically and spiritually, because of the choices that they made. It was, first of all, an amazing choice to do it in the Sistine Chapel and not in St. Peter's Basilica. But also, I noticed afterwards when they were kind of finishing the service and they were having a bit of a chitter-chatter, the Pope and the King. Did you see what they were looking at? They were looking at two of the Raphael tapestries which had been put out there on display. Did you see them looking at those?
I saw the photos of them, yes, the Raphael, beautiful Raphael tapestries.
Yeah, so everybody, of course, probably associates the Sistine Chapel with Michelangelo's lovely ceiling and the Last Judgment above the high altar, as you've mentioned. But when Pope Leo the Tenth commissioned a lot of the artworks in the early 16th century, probably the most expensive and magnificent ones in his mind that he commissioned were the series of tapestries from Raphael. 10 tapestries. Tapestry at the time was very expensive, very magnificent, and they were supposed to go along the walls of the Sistine Chapel. Now, because these tapestries, designed by Raphael, woven in Brussels, are so fragile today, they're hardly ever on display. And I just thought it was really interesting that two chosen to be on display today. And it felt to me like a bit of an art history power play by the Pope.
I've seen them actually, but I've seen them all installed. There was an event, it must be a decade ago now, when they put them back in, and extraordinary things. Of course, because the cartoons at the V&A that we have, which are the cartoons for these tapestries, the Raphael cartoons, made it a very significant event, so the V&A was involved. But yeah, they finish off the Sistine Chapel really beautifully. So just as artworks, because you know that there are these sort of layers to the Sistine Chapel. So you've got the fresco at the top by Michelangelo, which is basically, it depicts the story of humanity, as it were, to the point where we commit our big sins and then Noah's flood happens. So it's the reasons why the end of the world has to come, right? And all the prophets are up there looking terrified because they are also living through the end of the world. It's all part of Zechariah's big prophecy. And Zechariah, of course, is the prophet who is above the door. So when King Charles III and the Pope went into the Sistine Chapel, they passed directly under Michelangelo's portrayal of Zechariah, the prophet who prophesies the end of the world, big time. So the end of the world is happening, but below that there's a ring of pictures of the ancestors of Christ who are all separated. So men on one side, women on the other of the windows. And that's also prophesied by Zechariah, that the men will be divided from the women at the end. So that's very momentous. And then you had, finally, the fabulous Raphael tapestries. So fabulous to see the tapestries back in there.
Yeah, well, I think it was a nice touch by the Pope because, of course, as you mentioned, we have the cartoons for those tapestries. They're currently hanging in the V&A, a sumptuous display, but they belong to the King. They belong to Charles III because they were bought by his ancestor Charles I in 1623. So there's very few moments you can do this, right? When two heads of state would have been standing in the Sistine Chapel together, looking at world-class masterpieces by an artist called Raphael, and the Pope going, aren't these lovely? And the King going, yes, they're lovely, and I've got the cartoons for those. And it's a bit like you and me standing in your flat and admiring all your pictures and our mutually, we own, I think we each, perhaps I'm revealing too much here, we each own a painting by Peter Lely. Wow. So we have that kind of common art history bond, but on a very, very infinitely inferior level.
Yeah, that's true of the real Bendel Grosvenor. Don't forget, I'm still not sure who you are, and I have to say you're looking a little bit more satanic as you smile more and more at me. But anyway, I'm going to read something to you, which I'm hoping Bendel, if you are the real Bendel, I'm hoping will send some shivers down your spine. Right? Listen to this. This is Zechariah, chapter 6, verse 12. Thus speaketh the Lord, behold the man whose name is the branch, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. And he shall sit and rule upon his throne, and he shall be a priest upon his throne. And this shall come to pass. Now who do you know who is both a priest on the throne and a king? Who?
Well, both of them. The Pope and Charles III, in a way,
Well, no,
aren't
the
they?
Pope isn't a king. The Pope is just a priest on
He
a
is.
throne.
He's a head of state. He's a monarch.
King? No, he's not a king. The king, there's only been one king who could say that he's both those things. And that is, of course, Henry VIII and all his descendants. And this book that I'm writing, the Zechariah Prophecy, I'm going to delve into whether Henry VIII thought he was this chap who'd been called by Zechariah to be both the priest on the throne and the king on the throne. Now, this may have been the dynamite that really propelled him to take on the Catholic Church. So I know we all know the story about him wanting to marry another woman and the annulment of his marriage, but he was a religious fellow. Remember, he got 2 golden roses for his upholding of the Catholic Church. So anyway, I'm putting it to you again. This could be some spooky stuff going on in the Sistine Chapel last week.
Spooky, and yet also reconciliation, because I want to finish my little point about the Raphael tapestry as well by just exploring very briefly the actual choices of the 2 tapestries that the Pope chose to show the king. So there were 2 of the 10 on display, and one of them was the amazing image of Christ and St. Peter fishing. This is the miracle of the fishes, when Christ says, "Cast your net on the other side of the boat," and St. Peter doubts that there's going to be any fish there, and he catches this great haul. And this is the moment when St. Peter becomes an absolute convert to Christ. And Christ afterwards says, "Now you shall be a fisher of men." And of course, the Pope is the literal descendant of St. Peter. And St. Peter's attributes are the keys, and that's why you see the keys to heaven on all the Pope's kind of, iconography and symbolism. And the other tapestry, the second tapestry on display, was a key moment from the life of St. Paul. Now, St. Paul, the scene was the stoning of St. Stephen, which St. Paul was at. St. Stephen is the first Christian martyr, and St. Paul was at the stoning of St. Stephen, and it is after the stoning of St. Stephen that Paul has his Damascene conversion on the road to Damascus and becomes a Christian convert. Now, here's the really interesting thing, right? After the Reformation, the Church of England, for obvious reasons, feels uninclined to celebrate St. Peter because he's too associated with the Pope. But they do feel a much greater inclination to celebrate St. Paul, because St. Paul is a great Christian but had been converted by faith and revelation, right? He wasn't an office holder in the church. And so the Church of England feels that St. Paul is their man. I don't think you have to be too conspiratorial to think that maybe the Pope chose these 2 tapestries because one obviously represents the papacy. The Pope, Leo XIV, as now Christ's appointed official on earth, the fisher of men, and the other moment when St. Paul is about to convert, and maybe the Pope was hoping Charles III would see this message and go the whole hog, not just pray in the Sistine Chapel, but convert to being a Catholic himself. What do you think of that for a theory?
I think it's not a bad theory, and I think it's also a distinct possibility. And of course, something we're going to be coming on to soon, Bendor, when it comes to St. Peter's in one place and St. Paul's in another, if we're talking about 2 great cathedrals as well. But yes, St. Peter and St. Paul often seen together in so much Christian iconography. I love the miraculous draught of fishes. That's the one with all the birds in it as well, isn't it? There's I believe, is it a common crane in the foreground? Raphael was quite exact about the birds he has, but so there's a sort of big bird at the front catching one of the fishes in its beak, isn't it? I think it's a common crane, which of course used to be a common bird in Britain, although you don't see it anymore, hardly at all. But it's it's probably the most famous of the tapestries, isn't it? And certainly the one that's been most often copied and reused.
Well, there we are, a moment of art and faith and politics and history all combining in one amazing place.
And all those things, plus doom, dread, a fear of what may come in the future, because that's all there as well, I think. Indeed, Bendor, I don't know if you know, but exactly, and I mean exactly, 359 years ago, yes, 359 years ago, something momentous happened in Britain, something we need to talk about.
Dodgy anniversary.
Bendor, 1666, exactly 359 years ago, was a terrible year in British history, wasn't it? So much seemed to go wrong, but principally there were these 2 momentous events, which was the Great Plague, which finished in 1666 and basically killed about a quarter of Britain's population, and also the Great Fire of London, 1666. Now, I put it to you that this number, 1666, it's not an accident, is it? Let's face it. We all know from the book of Revelation that the number 666 is the number of the beast, isn't it, Bendor?
Yeah, I think I know. I don't know why. Why does he choose 666? Do you know?
Well, nobody knows for sure, but apparently, according to the latest thinking about it, it's a kind of Aramaic code. So it's a letter code. You know how the Bible's full of letter code and symbol codes and number codes? They love their sort of coded truths. And what they say is that 666 represents the letters of the word Nero. So in one of these Middle Eastern languages, the Emperor Nero, who was of course the first emperor to start the persecution of the Christians, the Emperor Nero's name somehow adds up or can be represented by the letter 666. So it could refer to Nero. Nero could be the original beast. But of course, more recently, I mean, someone like you who's a big Iron Maiden fan and listens to lots of heavy metal music and the like, you will know that more recently 666 has come to be associated with the devil, with Satan himself. And Aleister Crowley called himself, didn't he? The great Satanist Aleister Crowley called himself 666. So it's definitely a number which frightens people today, but really frightened people back in the 17th century. Everybody was expecting terrible things to happen. And they got them, didn't they?
So I don't think quite as many as a quarter of the population died. It was about a fifth of the population of London, but very, very grim times. About 70,000 people in London died of the plague. And then just as they were beginning to dust themselves off for that world, as you say, the Great Fire of London came and destroyed vast, vast amounts of the city.
It was awful. Did you know about plague? I mean, because it's played big in art, hasn't it? The bubonic plague. How much do you know about it as an actual illness?
I have no personal experience, well, fortunately, but I do know quite a little bit about the buboes. In fact, I'm going to talk about that later on in my choice of a ghoulish picture. But it was not a pleasant disease to get, and it tended to finish you off in a couple of days.
Yeah, it did. And you've heard of St. Roch. Appears in lots of altarpieces. He's the patron saint, in fact, of the bubonic plague. St. Roch. Do you know his story? It's a St. Roch or San Rocco in Italian. So he's the patron saint of the plague because he's supposed to have survived it twice. So he had it twice. And, in pictures of St. Roch, if anybody who wants to know which of all these saints that you see in all the churches and things, which is St. Roch, he's always the one who's holding out his naked leg and pointing to the top of his leg. And if you look near the top of the leg, you'll often see a kind of red welt or mark. So any saints holding up their robe to show their leg, male saints this is, that's going to be St. Roch. And that's because he's showing you where the first bubonic plague blotch appeared on his body. And it was often near the groin. So near the groin, and you know what that could possibly mean.
Armpits also.
Armpits as well, but the groin was usually the first one. So it was obviously associated with sort of sexual problems and licentiousness and what have you. Anyway, St. Roch gets the plague, which is why he's always showing you his naked leg, and he saves the Pope. So he actually saves the Pope. The other thing that happens with St. Roch is sometimes you see a dog next to him because while he was in prison recovering from the plague, a dog came and fed him. So a dog turned up and fed him bits of bread and things. So anyway, the whole point is that the Scuola San Rocco in Venice, which I know you love and I adore, which is this great entire scuola decorated by Tintoretto, it's all devoted to St. Roch, really, and also to surviving the plague. The whole thing is really Tintoretto's way of saying thank you for surviving the plague. Amazing place, the Scuola San Rocco, don't you think?
Yeah, with Tintoretto's crucifixion, which is like drive-through painting, drive-through cinema painting. Amazing thing.
Amazing. So anyway, the plague, switching back from Venice to London, the plague decimates the population in Britain. And it's spread by rats, right? Or rather, by fleas that sit on rats. So
that's right.
Do you know much about rats? Do you know the two main species of rat in Britain?
Well, rats are my Room 101 creature world. I was hoping you wouldn't mention them, but since this is a Halloween, I'll have to indulge you. But I'm terrified at your mere mention of the word rat.
Really? So if I say rats to you, rats,
no.
rats, do you find that spooky?
No, it really gets me. It's the one thing I cannot bear is a rat. So
Right.
let's cover this and move swiftly on.
Bendy, sorry, behind you, you've got a bookshelf here. What's that scuttling on the
Oh
top of the
no,
bookshelf?
don't.
There's a dark shadow. What is that? Oh, yeah, oh, I wonder what that was. Listen, there's two types of rat in Britain. There's a brown rat and the black rat. The black rat, which is now very, very rare, been overtaken by the brown rat. The black rat was the one that spread the bubonic plague. And it's sort of smaller, darker, creepier. Is that, there it is again at the back of the shelf.
Oh God.
What is that? It's creepier than the brown rat that spread the bubonic plague. Now, let's move on to the other thing, the Great Fire of London. So this is a terrible moment when people have predicted the end of the world would come. And what happens in Britain? The plague breaks open. And then when the plague is about to die down, what happens in Britain in the same year? The Great Fire of London. So, I mean, it is bloody biblical, isn't it, that these things should have happened at the same time?
Plus, you'd had the profound political upheaval of the Republic ending, the Cromwellian Republic ending, and Charles II being restored to the throne. And of course, as you know, Wald, a large part of the movement behind bringing in the Republic in the first place was this kind of all this biblical talk, some of the Puritan prophecies about Christ's return, so-called fifth monarchists who thought the world was going to end. So everything is in the cauldron in 1666.
It is. It makes it such a momentous year. But I wanted to, in an un-Halloween-like spirit, I wanted just to be a bit positive here, because, of course, the good news about the Great Fire of London is that it destroyed so much of the city that it all had to be rebuilt, and particularly the churches, right? So although there were, is it sort of 80-odd churches were destroyed by the Great Fire, and above all, of course, St. Paul's Cathedral was destroyed by the fire, so much so that they had to pull down what was left of it and rebuild it. And as going back to your interesting point about St. Peter and St. Paul, just as St. Peter's Cathedral was erected by Julius II out of nothing, really, in Rome, so when the Pope rebuilt St. Peter's Cathedral, that was an extraordinary messianic thing to do. So I believe the rebuilding of St. Paul's Cathedral in London was a very strange event, really. You know, the story of how Wren built St. Paul, how he got the design through. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? St. Paul's Cathedral shouldn't look the way it looks, should it?
No, because it looks suspiciously like St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And if you think that a large part of the cause of the English Civil War, so only, a couple of decades earlier, had been about the fear of Catholicism returning, and in particular, the fear of Charles I rebuilding the churches so that it looked a little bit more Catholic. I mean, it's literally Charles I's restoration of St. Paul's Cathedral to look a little bit more classical, which causes so much unrest in London. It's absolutely amazing to think that after the Great Fire of London, the great Christopher Wren seizes his opportunity, and we end up with this kind of sub-Catholic cathedral bang in the middle of what used to be Puritan London.
With a huge dome just like St. Peter's. But you know, if you look at the Wren drawings for the cathedral, so his first set of drawings, it's got a Gothic spire, and it looks like a ye olde English church. And then he smuggles in another set of drawings of this building with a dome, somehow gets that through, and ends up building something that is even more Catholic, really, in its outlines and its fashions. And of course, it does lead one to suspect, I think, and I'm kind of channeling my inner Bendor here, the same Bendor who saw a swan in Thomas Lawrence's portrait of Isabel Wolfe. I'm channeling my inner Bendor. It does lead you to suspect that these rumours about Wren being a Grand Mason, so the main Freemason, and the Freemasons were always on about rebuilding the temple and all that. Maybe there's something in that, because there's definitely something deeply unexpected and spectacularly left field about the way that St. Paul's Cathedral ended up. I mean, only a man driven by passions that, we can't possibly understand would have actually gone ahead with that, don't you think?
Yes, I'm a little bit suspicious of the Masonic theory. I think because the Masons tried to borrow Wren as their kind of Grand Vizier after they were founded, I think it sort of looks as if it makes sense, but only actually the direction of travel goes the other way. So Wren influences the Masons. But um, I think I'm tempted to see it more as a kind of Catholic, proto-Catholic classical movement. And in particular, once you understand that the interregnum and the Civil War represented such a profound break that they were all trying so busy to forget in the 1660s and 70s, that actually going back to making St. Paul's Cathedral look a little bit more classical and a little bit more like the design that Inigo Jones was trying to get through in the 1630s, then it just becomes a way of sort of healing the divide and pretending that great ruction had never happened. So it looks radical, but in some senses, Catholicizing St. Paul's Cathedral wasn't really. Especially when you look inside it. I mean, Wren was very clear he didn't want stained glass, and there were no paintings on the walls. So it was architecturally like a Roman church, and it's kind of Wren going mano a mano with Michelangelo, but spiritually it wasn't.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think you're underestimating the impact in 17th century London of knocking up a cathedral that looks just like St. Peter's in Rome, and that isn't supposed to look like that. It used to have a spire, it used to look English. It's a very dramatic thing to do. And I don't know about Wren being a Freemason. I mean, his father was supposed to be a Freemason as well, wasn't he? He was Dean of Windsor. And nobody knows about the shadowy Freemasons, but we do know that their whole idea really was to rebuild the church. So, I mean, I don't want to go down the swan path with you on this, but I just think you're underestimating the sheer chutzpah, really, of what Wren did. Putting up a big domed white building like that in ye Gothic Britain, was an outrageous act. And all the other churches he built as well. I mean, he built, 50-odd churches that were rebuilt under Wren's supervision or directly from his designs in the years that followed the Great Fire. It was a fantastic achievement, but also kind of driven by forces and energies that are almost impossible to understand today, I think.
Yes. But Wren's first ecclesiastical gig, do you know where that is?
First ecclesiastical gig? No, his first early building wasn't it the Sheldonian Theatre in Oxford?
Oh, no, the chapel of Pembroke College in Cambridge, which is
Ah.
the first purely classical religious building in England. Now, he gets that job from his uncle, Matthew Wren, who was the Bishop of Ely. And Matthew Wren, in the 1630s, before the Civil War, is one of the bishops who is most keen on Charles I's, what he called the beauty of holiness policy. And that was this idea of rebuilding the church, which had collapsed physically after the Reformation, because in a Protestant setting, churches don't really matter so much, the fabric of them. It's not a holy place. It's a place of congregation and the word rather than the image and the miracle of the Mass. So Matthew Wren, Bishop of Ely, a great champion of Charles I's policy of making churches look nice, he gets chucked in the Tower of London for the whole of the interregnum, for the whole of the Cromwellian Republic. And when he's sitting there in the Tower of London, he makes this pledge to himself that if he ever gets out, he promises to God that he will build a new church, and he puts aside a sum of money. So when he gets out, he builds this new church, which is classical in style and quite Catholic in style, and he gives the job to his nephew, a promising young mathematician called Christopher Wren, and it goes from there.
He was a Mason, obviously. Listen, you're talking about funny handshakes here. It's as clear as day to me that they were all at it. They were all at this business of trying to reverse Henry VIII's decisions.
Well, I'm with them.
Return England to a kind of Catholic state. I mean,
And Charles
your
III
guys,
is probably with them
Jacobites,
too.
they were all at it. They were all after the same kind of thing. And of course, abroad, if you look at Spanish pamphlets and things, or French pamphlets written about the Great Fire of London and the Great Plague of 1666, and all of them are united in saying that it was punishment by God for what happened in England when the Reformation happened and Britain left the church. So, I mean, listen, Masons are secretive for a reason. And since this is the Halloween special, I just think we owe them the favour of just believing in them a little bit more than we might do on another day. That's my suggestion to you.
All right. Well, anything that heals the Henry VIII's division, I'm up for that. Whatever we call it.
Yes, indeed. Well, look, now that we've reached this fabulous moment of unity, let's tear that apart again, Bendor, Grosvenor, because it's time for the muscles to start glistening again, because we're going to go into the bit we promised at the top, where you and I are going mano a mano to decide what is the most frightening picture in art. So Halloween special, who's going to win the most frightening picture?
Waldy versus Bendy.
So, Bendor, the most frightening image in art. Now, you're possibly pretending to be Bendor Grosvenor. You might really be somebody darker than that. So I'm suspecting very dark things from you. Who are you going to put up? Tell me why I should be most frightened of the image that you've chosen for this particular heavyweight contest of Waldy versus Bendy.
Well, at first glance, I must concede this is not a very frightening-looking painting. I've gone for a medieval fragment of a wall painting, which used to be on the wall of St. Stephen's Chapel in the mid-14th century. So we're talking about 1350s, 1360s this was made. And it was commissioned by King Edward III. Now, at the time, St. Stephen's Chapel was kind of one of the most prominent royal chapels in London. It's in Westminster Palace. It becomes slightly more famous later on because after the Reformation it becomes the site of the House of Commons. And it is still today the route you go through if you want to go and visit the House of Commons. But back then, St. Stephen's Chapel was a very important religious and royal place. And this painting was one of the paintings on the walls. And it is a tiny, tiny fragment, a literal, almost a miraculous survival. They found this little wall fragment, medieval wall painting, behind the walls of the old House of Commons after the Houses of Parliament burnt down in 1832. They found this, and it's now in the British Museum. And there's not much of it you can see. But the little scene you can see, I don't know what you can make out. This is the story of Job, the Old Testament story of Job. And I'm sure you know, being a biblically minded fellow, all about the story of Job.
Yes, I know a bit about Job. Yes, he's the character who is very rich and wealthy and happy and has lots of kids. And the devil decides to test his belief in God by tempting him or destroying lots of things in his life and reducing him from this successful man who had everything going for him to this shivering wreck, just to see if he would still believe and trust in God at the end of it all. That's right, isn't it? There's a great painting by Georges de la Tour, which I saw recently in Paris, of Job's wife taunting Job, because the wife's saying to him, look, come on, you've lost everything here, you're just an idiot, why don't you stop believing in God? But he refuses. So he's a kind of embodiment, isn't he, of genuine belief and unbreakable faith. I think that's what you'd say about him. Is that right?
Absolutely, perfectly summarised. Thank you very much, Weld. Job is tested by the devil to test his faith, and the devil takes away his children, all his possessions, and we see in this little tiny fragment, we see Job is naked. And this is the moment when the devil really gets to work on him, because he smites him with a ghastly disease. And if I quote a little line from the Bible, the devil smites Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. Now, I don't know if you can zoom in, Weld, on the British Museum website. It's quite good. You can zoom in on the figure of Job. He's naked there, but can you see under his armpit? Can you see the little red splodge?
Not very well, but I'm reading where you're heading with this. Go on.
Yeah, so I've been to see this, and the red splodge is quite clear in real life. And now this takes us back to the buboes, the plague that we mentioned in the earlier item, because this painting, indeed this whole chapel, is about an earlier and even more terrifying instance of the plague. And I'm talking, of course, about the Black Death. Now, if you thought 1666 was scary, Weld, the Black Death was the most horrific it must have been a completely terrifying moment to appear live in this country. The Black Death first strikes, it's a bubonic plague, it first strikes in 1348, and it comes in a number of waves. And by the time it's finished, a couple of decades later, pretty much half the population is dead. So we did discuss earlier the bubos, the process of the bubonic plague, and what would happen. I've got a little quote here from someone, a chronicler called John of Fordun, who describes what happened to you. He was a Scot, actually, and he called it the foul death of England because it comes up first from England to Scotland. And John of Fordun describes the damage was done by an extraordinary and novel form of death. Those who fell sick of a kind of gross swelling of the flesh lasted for barely 2 days. And the bubos would appear, as you mentioned, on your groin and also under your armpit. And if you got one of those, then that was pretty much it. And you were for the chop.
Oof.
Now, how does this story appear on the walls of St. Stephen's Chapel? And why is this both fascinating and horrific? And I think it comes down to the fact that we have to put ourselves in the mindset of a medieval monarch like Edward III. Your kingdom is afflicted with this terrible plague, and not unreasonably at the time, given scientific knowledge, you assume this is biblically ordained. And so your prime way of fighting this terrible calamity is through prayer. And because we're talking about pre-Reformation England, religion at the time was very largely a visual phenomenon. Believing involved seeing. It involved pictures on the walls and stained glass windows and all this kind of stuff. So, oddly enough, Edward III's, one of his first responses to fighting the plague is to finish off redecorating St. Stephen's Chapel. And I'm going to put in the show notes, Wald, and we'll show on the YouTube channel on ZCZ. There's a fascinating 19th century recreation of what St. Stephen's Chapel looked like. And you can see every surface is painted. And you can see all the stained glass windows as well. Now, in the bottom of the stained glass windows, oddly enough, you don't see much glass, but you do see these wall paintings. And the painting I'm discussing, the little fragment of Job in the British Museum, is what went in those apertures, little painted plaster panel instead of glass. And that is because these pictures were painted in a great rush. And we know from the royal accounts at the time, the building of St. Stephen's Chapel, that they had to resort to forced labour in order to get these pictures finished, because the poor old artists who were in London having to work on this chapel, they kept dying. And the architects kept dying too, and the glaziers kept dying. So they had to, what the word is, impress. It's actually kind of forced labour. They had to go out and catch, if you were an artist, really bad news during the Black Death, because you would be caught and summoned to London in order to work on sites like St. Stephen's Chapel, in order to help fight the plague. It's sort of, a medieval equivalent of us rushing to source vaccines during COVID. In those days, they built and decorated churches. So the picture, this almost extraordinary little survival I'm showing you now of naked Job with his boil, his bubos under his armpit, takes us right back to that terrifying moment when the Black Death strikes England, strikes London, a disease they'd never seen before. They assume it's from God. They assume it's a test, like Job being tested in his faith. And they react to it by proving their faith and by painting pictures like this and finishing off the Chapel of St. Stephen's. So fascinating, and I hope you would agree, also quite terrifying.
Yeah, yes, and very similar to what happened. So which was the worst plague? Black Death was worse than 1666, wasn't it, in terms of people killed?
Oh, yeah, by a magnitude of about 10.
Really, yeah. Of course, it's the idea of building a church and decorating a church, trying to get to heaven by sort of buying your way there was a big deal in all the story of art all the way through, not just the Middle Ages, right up until the 17th century people did that. Listen, St. Stephen's Chapel was, as you said, in the Houses of Parliament. Is it that bit that, when you go and visit the Houses of Parliament, I know it was destroyed, but they rebuilt on top of it, didn't they? Exactly the same footprint, as it were.
Yeah.
Is it the bit where you approach the Houses of Parliament? There's like a hallway if you're going in as a member of the public, And it's got these murals on the side, sort of
That's right.
Victorian. Is that it there?
Yeah, it's the same footprint. The original chapel, the croft underneath, St Mary's Undercroft, is still there, but
Yes.
they built on the same footprint above it. It's now a kind of procession way to the new House of Commons, which is on the left through Central Lobby. But in the old days, it was the actual House of Commons.
Yeah. And I've been to a wedding in the Undercroft. So that's St Mary Undercroft. I'm sure you as well, because isn't it something like people who are descended from the House of Lords or something are allowed to get married there? I did go to a wedding there. It was amazing. It felt very historic. Have you been married there yourself a few times, Bendor? Or?
No, I did. I used to work in the House of Commons, so I used to sneak in. If you worked there and had a magic pass, you could go anywhere. So I used to sneak in the Undercroft, and
Yeah.
there's not much medieval painting left in there, but it is the actual medieval space. It still exists. Yeah.
What a thought. So St. Stephen, the titular saint here, he was the first martyr, wasn't he? So he was stoned to death.
That's right.
There's
Yes.
some fantastic scenes of St. Stephen being stoned, particularly in that wonderful church I'm sure you went to when you were in Rome recently, San Stefano Rotondo, the round church with all the dead martyrs in it. Amazing, amazing place. But listen, these are fascinating things, and I didn't know the story at all. So it is deeply interesting. And I'm just sort of looking, the only thing I managed to enlarge, I'm afraid, in my inability to deal with pictures on the internet, I managed to enlarge a picture of what looks like a banquet. Is it a banquet? It's the scene, isn't it, where Job's children are being killed? Is that right? And the Satan is coming down through a window and killing them. There's a devil in the picture. There's an actual picture of the devil, isn't there?
I think he's in there. But wow, what is this great tolling bell I can hear?
Well, that is
I knew.
That's called the Halloween bell, Bendor. So that is the bell which is about to announce that you're about to lose this competition to find the most frightening image in art, and I'm about to win it. So it's our tolling bell that goes at a certain hour here in France.
Wonderful. It sounds absolutely fantastic. Do you live in some kind of convent or something?
No, well, I do in a way.
You go and atone for your sins in France.
So I live opposite the church in the village, in what was the presbytery. So this was the village presbytery. We're attached to the presbytery by flying buttresses. So there's like flying buttresses going across. In fact, when we bought the house, Bendor, it said it used to be the presbytery, so the local vicar used to live here, but it had been empty for a long time. But we did find inside, in fact, in the very room in which I'm sitting, we did find the mechanism that controls the bells. So I could actually control the bells from where I'm sitting. I'm not going to, because I have done it a couple of times in the past, and it sends the village into madness. I mean, if you ring the bell,
The Polish Quasimodo is afoot.
exactly. If you ring the bell for 3:00 when actually it's only 2:00, everybody goes nuts. Oh, thankfully that stopped. Yeah, sorry, that's the big bell ring at 12:00. But as I said, what it announces is the introduction of my picture into this story. I did find yours fascinating, I must say, and worthy of discussion here. But I can't put my hand on my heart, Bendor, and say that it sent shivers down me. It was interesting more than terrifying. And I don't believe that's true of the picture I've chosen, which is a picture called The Nightmare by Henrik Fuseli. Now, Fuseli is born in Switzerland, came to England at the time of your great hero, Sir Joshua Reynolds, basically, and specialised in spooky pictures. That's really what he's best known for. So he painted scenes from Shakespeare with Macbeth's witches, etc. But this is his masterpiece, The Nightmare, painted in 1781, by far his spookiest picture. And he's also known for doing a lot of porn drawings. Have you seen those, the pornographic ones?
Yeah, there was a display at the Courtauld Gallery. Was it a couple of years ago?
Very
Very dirty stuff. Yeah,
Well, it was
dirty.
strange because he has a fetish about women's hair. So this exhibition at the Courtauld that you're talking about,
And their behinds. Yeah, hair and backs.
hair
It's
and
proper
bums.
thigh rubbing stuff.
Yeah, very Scottish. It was all very, Hebridean, his strange taste in eroticism. But anyway, so The Nightmare, if you look at the picture, right, so there is a woman dishevelled, either asleep or in some way intoxicated or perhaps in a post-coital slump, we're not sure, lying off the end of a dishevelled bed, right? But sitting on her chest, just below her bosom, is this horrible little gremlin, a sort of furry-looking monster with a spooky face that's looking out and pointed ears, looking out straight at us. And there's a big purple curtain behind, and then to the side of the curtain, to the left of the picture, there's a horse's head poking out. Now, of course, the word nightmare, which is the title of this picture, does not come actually from the word mare, as in to do with horses. So a mare is a horse in English, but the word nightmare comes from a different source. So it's the word mare, meaning an incubus or a satanic figure from Old English. In fact, in Polish still, actually, weirdly enough, the nightmare is called a mara, which is the same sort of word, Northern European word for an incubus. An incubus is a devil, a devil who comes down to people at night. So he's that spooky little figure in the middle. He comes down to people at night and he sits on their chest. And if they're women, he does terrible things to them, which I'm not going to go into because this is a family podcast, right? But you can imagine it all. So, people obviously thinking about the origins way back of the incubus, people were obviously trying to deal with this idea that, in the middle of the night, if you're having a nightmare, your chest feels heavy and it's as if someone's sitting on your chest and you can't breathe properly and you're uncomfortable. So that notion of the incubus seems to have arrived from those kinds of feelings. But like your devil in the window in the St. Stephen's Chapel fragment, this is a kind of incarnation of the devil, the incubus. And the incubus has a very spooky history. I mean, it's the origin, really, of all sorts of other stories. Incubus comes down and has wild sex with women. He's an evil, lurking presence. But the reason for the horse being there is that the way he gets around, this incubus, is by riding his horse through the night. So the horse is there not because it's part of a nightmare idea, but because the incubus used to ride around on a horse. He's been riding around in that case in this picture. He's parked his horse through the window and he's gone in, had his way with this poor, drooping woman who's lying off the edge of the bed. And we can only fear and wonder what may have happened. So just as an image, Bendy, you've got to admit, it's pretty damn spooky. And I would say spookier than your fragment from St. Stephen's Chapel.
It is quite spooky. And I am a Swiss citizen, and I'm very proud of being a Swiss. Yeah,
What?
so me and Fuseli were Swiss together. That's fine. So I'm on Team Fuseli already.
You're
However,
a Swiss citizen? So
Yeah.
is that a bank vault thing? It's just to do with having loads of cash in the bank in Zurich. Is that what it is?
no, if you eat enough cheese, and I eat a lot of cheese, then you qualify for being Swiss. So no, my mum's family is Swiss. But anyway, so I'm on Team Fuseli because we're both Swiss, right?
Right.
But I've got to say, the the horse in this picture is so completely ridiculous. It looks like a pantomime horse. So I'm afraid for me, it does slightly shatter any feelings of fear and terror because I'm half expecting, I don't know, someone like Roy Hudd to pop out from behind the curtain and go cooey.
Well, it's not George Stubbs, let's face it. I'll agree with you. And I think Fuseli, as a draftsman, had creaky moments. But the notion here of this demonic figure coming back down at night. And the incubus is the male version of the devil in this form. But the female version is called a succubus. Have you heard of the succubus?
No.
So the succubus is the female devil that comes down to men at night. So descended from Lilith, the first wife of Satan, they say. And the succubus sucks out all your semen and kills all your children.
Do you know, but I've got to say, because we put the word nude in the title of the last week's podcast, YouTube has declared we're porn. So you have to log in and have your age verified. So we must be careful. This is a family podcast, and we don't want to be struck off the YouTube algorithm, and no one will be able to see us if we any more of this dirty talk.
All right. That's tough to manage in this particular picture because there's something else that's fascinating about it, right? Apart from all the succubus stuff. The painting hangs in the Detroit Museum of Art, so it's a fabulous museum, by the way, if you've never been there. But on the back, there is a portrait of a young woman. So a very elegant young girl from the times. And it's said to be a portrait of Anna Landholt. Now, Anna Landholt was the niece of one of Fuseli's friends, right?
Good Swiss
And
name,
he-
Landholt.
Sorry?
Good Swiss name, Landholt.
Yes, it's a good Swiss name, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
Yes, but it was her name, and she lived in Zurich. And Fuseli went to meet his friend, and he met her there, fell madly in love with her, passionately, crazily in love with her. So much so that he wrote to this friend of his and said, I've got to marry this woman, right? And he wrote this letter, which I'm going to quote a bit from for you, just to show how spooky all this is, right? He said, "Last night I had her in bed with me." Remember, this is the niece of a friend who's a quarter of his age. "Last night I had her in bed with me, tossed my bedclothes hugger-mugger, wound my hot and tight-clasped hands about her." Listen, that's not the sort of thing you write. And then he proposed marriage to her, right? I mean, Fuseli was, ordained as a vicar early in his career, so he's meant to be a man of God. And he writes this letter, this awful letter, to his
Gone
friend,
right off him.
asking a very Swiss behaviour, asking for her hand in marriage. And of course, he got turned down. But this is what underpins this image, right? So not only have you got the particular scene in front of you, you've got this whole idea behind it of this strange Fuseli falling for Anna Landholt, painting her on the back of the picture, and then, as it were, reimagining the scene on the other side with her lying there in a post-coital slump while he's sitting there looking evil and staring out at us. So, I mean, I just don't think you could come up with a spookier set of circumstances and an image that touches so many dark buttons as this one. Now, I'm going to stop there because we've been talking too much, and I'm getting a bit frightened myself, actually, just listening to myself, and let alone listening to you. So I think we need a judgment here. We need a big judgment. Taya is going to judge us. She's like the referee in a boxing match. She's going to judge us, and she's going to tell us who has come up with the image that is most frightening in our wonderful Halloween special. Taya, you've seen the pictures, you've heard the arguments. And now just tell me by how many points and how convincingly have I whopped Bendor Grosvenor in the contest to find the most frightening picture?
Yeah, so no, both very fascinating pictures, and also both very good stories.
Good.
But I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go with the nightmare, because it's just a tad more frightening.
Yeah.
St. Stephen was really cool, although I'm probably at a disadvantage. I couldn't zoom into the image, so it was very small. I couldn't see that much.
All right.
But I really enjoyed the story in that it was found in the wall of the chapel. But the nightmare is both a slightly creepier picture by itself, even if you don't know the story, and the story of the incubus is also very scary. Although I will agree with Bendor that the goofiness of the horse does take it down a slight notch.
Yeah, I think I go with that, actually, because it is it's a horrifying and actually horrifyingly creepy picture. Fuseli's I've gone right off him, my fellow Swiss. So I agree. I sympathise with your choice, Taya. Thank you very much. An excellent choice.
So there you are, Bendor. I'm afraid I've whopped you yet again. It's a shame, because I did think your thing was actually incredibly interesting, and it makes me want to go to the House of Commons and dig up the space for St. Stephen's and all that stuff again. So you're a very honourable loser, if you are indeed the real Bendor Grosvenor. I've done my bit for Halloween, I've done my bit for Prophecies of Doom, and if the end of the world doesn't happen this week, as I'm suggesting it might, hey, that's life. It does mean at least that we'll be able to come back next week for yet another episode of Waldy and Bendy's Adventures in Art. So that's good news, isn't it? And from me, on that optimistic note, it's goodbye.
And a happy Halloween and goodbye from me. See you all next week.
Waldy and Bendy.